New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. So glad that you have joined me for today's episode of The Inclusive Church, creating spiritual communities where oneness does not require sameness, creating spiritual communities where all kinds of people are not only valued, but they are utilized and included in everything that happens, creating inclusive churches where people can show up and their ideas, their backgrounds, their needs are all integrated into a collective experience of seeing all the ways God shows up in the world and remembering it's no accident. It is no coincidence. It is a divine design. So, just in case this is your very first time, or it's been a really long time since you've been hanging out with me on the Inclusive Church, I want to remind you of or share with you two things. One, I am purposely using church, not spiritual community, not spiritual center, even though I will use those words as well. I'm using church because I think it is past time for us to reclaim the reality that the church is not a piece of property. It is an intentional collection of people who have decided to walk the path on the spiritual journey together. And so I use church intentionally. And you will hear me refer to, if you're a leader in a spiritual community, or if you're the person leading the church to be inclusive, just FYI, I'm not only talking to ministers. Ministers, I hope, are leaders in each of their communities, but ministers alone are not the only leaders who are needed for the church to run, let alone for the church to be inclusive in a meaningful and authentic way. So with those two things out of the way, what are we talking about today? Virtual community on Inclusive Church. And there's so many things that have happened in the last 4 weeks that have made me want to spend 25 or 30 minutes just talking about things to keep in mind as you are serving or growing a virtual community and you intend it to be inclusive. So let's just kind of dive right in. As I've been thinking about this over the last few days, I have been thinking about the fact that part of it is marketing. How do we want to do our marketing in order to be inclusive and to be inclusive of our virtual community? And part of it is serving, right? In the ministry itself, how are we serving our virtual community? Um, and and then I also thought like that's kind of across the, you know, the axis or the horizontal line, the breadth. But then if we're gonna, go deep or vertical, then we actually have at least at least three audiences within this umbrella, right? So you have people who are guests or visiting, or someone gave them a link, and they really are not yet a part of your community, even though they are attending or even though they have questions. And then you have the vertical grouping of people who consider themselves actively engaged. Now, they may or may not consider themselves members, but they're people who maybe have your Sunday service bookmarked because more Sundays than not, they come and participate online. Or they're people who have taken 3 or 4 classes and they maybe don't show up on Sundays on a regular basis, but they're involved or engaged in classes or workshops that you are offering virtually. Or they may be people who have been a part of the community in person, but maybe now they live somewhere else that they cannot easily geographically come and hang out with you in person. Or there are people who have been members in the past, and maybe for whatever reason they consider themselves members somewhere else, locally or nationally or internationally, but they still feel connected to your ministry, your church, your community. And then the third big category would be geographic community. And I'll probably not spend very much time on that today since this is a Tuesday. I don't have a featured guest. I'm going to try to keep it in right at 30 minutes or less as a toolkit. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the community you're in. For example, I am based in Dallas, Texas. And so even though I can clearly identify people who are visiting and who are guests, and I can clearly identify people who are members or people who are engaged, have a connection to my spiritual community. And then the third group would be, oh, well, how, as we look at virtual ministry, how do we also serve the community? Are there community service activities that we used to do in person or that we want to do to supplement what we do in person? Are there community festivals or events that are online? So I said festival, didn't I? Most festivals are not online, but some of them do have a component that's online. But events that different groups might be hosting that would impact or that would, I would want my spiritual community to be seen as supporting that or being involved in that. And it's a virtual program, right? So then that's touching the geographic community that we are in. And if we really get serious about it, we might look nationally or internationally for virtual events as well. But mostly today, at least, I'm thinking about how do you serve or impact the virtual geographic community where you are, which then actually brings us full circle right back to the group of people who are guests, who are new to the ministry, who don't know a lot about you, but they found out about you some way, and then they come and show up online to check you out. So let's talk about marketing first, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on that either. I want to spend the majority of the time with you today on serving your virtual community. But marketing to your virtual community also does require you to intentionally think about who are you trying to attract and why. Who do you want to be serving? But you have to reach them first, get them interested, draw them in to the point where they feel I have a connection, or they have a connection with your church. And so part of marketing, again, with that full circle approach, might be what community service activities do we participate in? What events do we participate in? If we are trying to grow our LGBTQ plus church community, and we want it to be clear that we understand what that means, and that we are a place where people who identify as LGBTQ plus are not only welcome, but they are affirmed and they are engaged and included, then I might decide, right, or as a member of the board or the staff, it might make sense to decide to do some community service by supporting a local community organization in something that they are offering online, and have the logo or have a representative from our church be on a panel that is reaching that community. So in that case, I might be combining what might be community service with marketing, because those messages are totally in alignment with one another. I could also be, in terms of marketing, I'm going to look at what platforms do I use. I was in an interesting conversation, I guess now it's probably been a couple of months, but a couple of months ago, with someone who said, well, you can be on Facebook and post 15 posts a day, but if you don't use Instagram Reels, or if you don't use video, really short video, in Facebook stories or Reels, but preferably Instagram Reels, then you're going to miss, the majority of people who are under the age of, I think they said 40, and or 45. And then they said, and if you want to get eyes of people who are under 35, then you have to be on TikTok and you have to use video. And so it's really great to post a notice about an event that the church is doing that younger people, younger adults would be interested in. But if you just simply post a static graphic of that event with the information, it's not going to change who shows up. And it was just a great conversation, because we talked about not only different platforms that should be used to reach different age groups and other demographics, but also what the content would be. Do you just give data and information and then, that meets the need? Or when is it that you need a person? Like with our younger people, adults, right? They've grown up in the influencer generation. So they're more likely to respond to someone who appears to be, having a good experience, telling them about what's good and what to expect and what to look for versus just seeing a static post where the church has said, here's the information, come on and show up. So those little things are really important because if you're going to use virtual for marketing as well as for servicing, which we'll get to in a minute, but marketing, then it's not just the information, it's how it's presented, it's where it's presented, days of the week that make a difference, time of the day that makes a difference, because you have to know who you're approaching. So let's talk about how you actually provide service, support, spiritual education, and development to people virtually. Because at the core, when people are wanting to engage with you virtually, it's super, super important. So if I'm trying to invite guests, right, the invitation needs to be virtual because I'm trying to reach people who are virtual. If I have a handout that I want to use with my in-person folks, so almost everything I'm going to say about guests is going to apply to members or people who know you, and so I'll add some things. So for everyone, right, if you're going to have a handout or something you're passing out to the people who are in person, you need to have a virtual version of that people online can quickly click and download or click on the link and see it on a web page if they want to. Just this past week before today, this past week, I had to chastise myself because I had a last minute idea to provide a piece of cardstock, like an 8.5 by 11 page, with some visuals and a prompt and lines so that people, as we were going through the service, could journal a little bit or could take notes. Now, I normally am really good about anything like that. What are we going to do? Are we going to have a link? Are we going to have a page, that people online can link to? But I had this idea at the last minute. And so I executed the idea. We had the handouts all ready to pass out as people came in on campus. And as the service started and I realized I was going to be holding up the page and explaining to people, I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't do this 3 days early where we could then set up a web page that people could go to or provide them a link where they could download it. And we don't have time to do that because when I say last minute, those of you who know me know that means, like at 5 a.m. that morning, I had the idea for a service that was starting, at 10. So, so it didn't happen. But the good thing is, I hope, is that people who were watching online, because I had realized that I didn't have a link to give them, when I verbally explained what the form was for, I said, and if you're at home, I'm hoping you have paper handy, and that during, you might want to get that now so that if you are so inspired to want to take notes, make a note, or journal during the process we're going through, you'll be able to do that. And I hope it sounded like, the people in the audience, they wouldn't necessarily have paper nearby or their journal. And so that's why we're giving them a piece of paper. But either way, it's like because I had thought about it, I remembered to explain it to the people who were watching virtually because I didn't want them to be left out and I wanted them to know they could have the same experience as the people in the room, and they might want to get a piece of paper and something to write with in order to do that. For people you're serving virtually, especially if they're guests or they're new, you want to have a clear path for them to follow to get more information. You want to have a clear pathway for them to become members. And you want to be able to mention that, if not, every week or a couple times a week, but on a regular basis, so that if someone has watched a couple of times or participated online a couple of times and they're like, "Ooh, yeah, I like this community," then they have a way to get on your mailing list. They have a way to get more information about upcoming classes or events. They have a way to be able to engage with you, and they have a way to identify themselves as members. So, if you have membership classes twice a year, how are you making that accessible? It doesn't mean you have to do it at the exact same time as you're in person. If that's awkward or uncomfortable to have some people in the room and some people online, you could have a separate, maybe it's once a year, maybe it's some other schedule where it's just for people who are online and you build them into your community that way. And then you always want to get surveys and feedback on a regular basis. It's one thing to say, "Hey, please put in the chat, what you thought about today's experience." It's something else when you actually have 3 questions or 4 questions and the survey link and people fill it out, and then you're able to dissect it and go through it and look for patterns. So that's really, really important. And I'm surprised at how many leaders I've talked to who have, when I ask them, "So how often are you getting um, structured feedback from the people who are watching you online or participating in your events online?" And the answer basically is, "We've never done that." So you want to build that in. Now, what do you want to add when you realize you have a steady group of people who are online? When you have a steady or a growing group of people who do consider themselves members of your church, even though they don't come on campus often, if ever. And so some things you want to add to what's already been said is, for people who are in that group, right, you start to recognize their names over and over. And so if there's a large enough group, then I would suggest that you actually create a group for the online participants, where once a month, or maybe it's once a quarter, you'll know best for your ministry. But what comes to mind for me is once a month, there's some kind of meeting, that some kind of enrichment. It is online. It is reviewing some of the basic principles you cover, or it's reviewing the key points from if you have Sunday talks, from the Sunday talks for that month, or if you are a teaching ministry and you've offered a couple of classes or a book discussion group, that you do something on a regular scheduled basis that is specifically for the people who are online, related to what you are doing on campus or in the physical church, right? Not, you can do some things that are just completely separate, but again, your goal is that they feel like members. Another thing that I've seen be very effective is when you offer something like that on a regular basis, but you feature different people. So maybe there are certain people who often show up on your platform or to sing or whatever. Like, you want to bring in some of those familiar faces where the people online have an opportunity to talk to them directly or to hear from them directly or to ask them questions that, maybe others get to ask after service in the fellowship hall and get to know the music director better, right? Or maybe there are things that are going on and your communications director is in the process of rolling out a lot of different communication, and to have that staff person come for 15 minutes and be in conversation with the virtual attendees to say, hey, how will this work for you? Or what's the best way to communicate with you, because you're not here physically? Um, how would you like to get information about our upcoming events, right? It's on the website. Is that enough? Or would something else be helpful? So you really want to connect them in to the community that you are. And you want to do it really on a regular basis so that you too, as a leader, don't forget. It's not an add on. These are actual members, actual people who are engaged with you on a regular basis. And one of the things that you also want to keep in mind always when you're planning are all the things that we offer to our people in person, are we also offering them to our virtual audience, our virtual members? And if not, is there a real tangible reason why we are not? There may be a reason, but my experience is that 90 to 95% of everything you do in person, you can do with people virtually if you are willing to do that. And one final thing that comes to mind, that I am surprised. I'm surprised that more churches and more spiritual leaders aren't doing. So whatever platform or platforms you are using virtually to reach people for your live programs and for recorded programs as well, but especially for live streaming, um, have someone from your community, virtual or physical, serving as an official host for the people who are virtual, like putting questions in the chat or quoting things that are said during the class or doing the service, asking, quoting. Tracy just said, blah, blah, blah. What do you think about that? Because it's so easy for people who are watching virtually to almost like I'm watching a movie, or oh, I'm watching a performance. But to turn viewers into committed members or committed participants requires engagement. And so having someone who is assigned to do that is helpful. It also is helpful because a lot of times people will just have questions. Maybe there was a link that was put in about a class that starts in 2 weeks. and someone will be like, well, what's that class about? So if you have someone who is in the role of host, they can say, oh, well, here is the link online, or they can click on the link and they can actually quickly read, oh, well, that class is focused on understanding the basics of religious science. And it's a really good class for people who are new to the movement, right? But there's someone there. And if they don't know and there's not a link they can quickly, link to, at least they can say, that's a really good question. And let me see if I can find an answer for you. Or that's a really good question. And please go to the web page that, of the link, because it will answer your questions. Or that's a really good question. And, if you connect with the staff on Tuesday or Wednesday, they'll be able to answer that question. But their question is not just in the virtual chat, like, did anybody see it? So that's my last tip for right now. I think that we'll spend a couple of sessions in future shows where we talk more about reaching the virtual audience, but also serving the virtual audience in a way that is meaningful for them and that also demonstrates your commitment to being inclusive. That's it for this episode of The Inclusive Church. I am so happy that you joined me today. I hope that you will share this episode or other episodes with people you know who might be interested or who are committed to creating spiritual communities where oneness does not require sameness. My name is Tracy Brown. I'll see you again next week right here on the New Thought Media Network.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.